So how does this class work? This class is designed a bit differently from what you might normally be used to in the university lecture. In this class, lecture is going to be focused around you and what it is that you understand. Not so much about me and what I will say at the front of the class. A clicker is required for this class, and you should have gotten one at the bookstore. It's not an optional thing. Using it every day in class will be 10% of your grade. Now, why are we using these? Well, clickers are actually going to be used in this course to help both you and to help me figure out what it is that you understand, but what it is, some things that you might need some extra help with as well. So lecture is going to be very different. But before I tell you a little bit about what's actually going to happen, have you ever thought about why we have lecture? Well, to think about this, I'd like you to think back to medieval times. And if we're in the world of Western civilization, we were back before the printing press, there were these scholars over here, and they were fairly important and specialized people. There weren't very many of them. Maybe they were monks, probably had access to a greater amount of funding than many people, and they were the keepers of knowledge. Now, what would happen if this guy here, this monk, he heard that there was some new knowledge over here in this other place? Somebody had learned something. They had something new to share. Well, what he'd have to do would be he'd mount an expedition, and he'd go over hills and dales and mountains and maybe putting his life and his limb at risk. And he'd go over here to where there was this new knowledge, and he'd talk to the people there, and he'd listen to them explain it. And remember, there was no printing press, so paper was really expensive and wasn't a whole lot of it. So he might make a few little crib notes about what he understood from talking to this scholar who had this new knowledge. And when he thought he really had it, and he was done, he'd come all the way back, and he'd come back. And then when people were like, oh, hey, you've returned, and they would want to know about this knowledge that he created, well, then he would gather people around him. They would come and they would see him, and they'd gather around, and maybe, in a small venue or someplace like this, an arena, and they'd listen to him talk about what it was he learned, and he'd give his explanation as he understood it of what this new knowledge was. And that was really the only way that people could do it, in person, verbally, because, again, paper and the printing press wasn't really commonly available then. So that's why it kind of looks a little bit like lecture, doesn't it? I mean, if we were really to go and, look at all these people, we have our knowledgeable person down here, and we have maybe some people who've come and they've gathered around to listen to this knowledgeable person explain what it is that they understand about something important. All right, so that's maybe one possible explanation of why we maybe have lecture, that we gather around, and this is, a common thing that has happened. But, since then, there have been many great innovations. I mean, first off, as I've mentioned, the printing press did, in fact, come into being. And, suddenly, you can actually, get knowledge, and you can buy it, and it comes in book form, and, many, many people can get access to it. And then, more recently, there's the web and Amazon.com, and now you can actually purchase knowledge and have it delivered to your door in 2 days. So what this really means is the world has changed a great deal, and you no longer have to trust the monk or some super knowledgeable person to explain it to you in a way that you hope you understand based on what it is that they understand. You can actually purchase the knowledge in book form and read it and analyze it for yourself. So if we come to lecture, and I, as a knowledgeable person, stand up at the front and rephrase your textbook for you, you really have to ask yourself, what purpose does that serve? However, in traditional class structures at the university level, they often kind of look like this. I mean, first, maybe you come to lecture, right? And the professor would talk about some things, and this would be your first exposure to the material, and you take down some notes, maybe especially about the things you didn't understand, and you capture all that down, everything that they said or wrote on the board. And then maybe you'd go home and perhaps you'd open your textbook, because maybe there were some things you didn't quite understand, and you might read up a little bit more, especially on the hard stuff. And then after that, maybe you'd do some homework, and that would give you an opportunity to see if you could really do what it is that you needed to do, and see if you could really know that hard stuff. And then, of course, later on you'd take an exam, and you'd show that you'd mastered that knowledge. But the problem with this situation here, the problem with this design, is that you have very little opportunity for expert feedback. I mean, here is where you have access to an expert who can explain things in different terms and different words, but in this scenario, you're really only getting them at the very beginning with your first exposure to the information, and you have little opportunity to really value and gain from access to that expert. So in this class, we're going to learn about peer instruction-based design, and this is how our course is going to be developed. And it's a little bit different, so let me outline how it's going to work for you. First off, you're not going to start off in lecture. You're going to start off before lecture doing something that we call homework. Okay? Homework, in this case, will come before class, and basically the idea here is that we want to move that first exposure that you have with the material outside of class, because there are textbooks that you can use, or maybe we'll have resources online, videos, or other things that you will do, and you'll try out and you'll try to get some of that first exposure and understanding of knowledge. Okay, then what you're going to do is you'll come into class and there's a quiz. Now wait, why is there a quiz before the lecture? Well, this quiz is basically just an incentive to give you the excuse to do your homework. I mean, we know that you're very busy people, and so this quiz will first off give you allow you to take the time and really force yourself to do that homework. But the other thing it will do is it will give you an idea of what it was we wanted you to already have understood from reading, from the homework, before you came into class, so that you can now be prepared to engage in learning the hard stuff in lecture, which is what we're going to do. So this quiz isn't a quiz about you have to know everything. This is a quiz about some of the basic stuff we want you to have gotten from the reading. And really we want everybody to get 97, 98% of these questions right, because it's supposed to be just making sure that you are ready and you're prepared to come to lecture. Okay. What's going to happen in lecture? Now, in lecture, we're actually not going to do quite so much lecturing, but in fact, what I'll be doing is I'll be presenting to you some questions that I have made up based on the things that people usually have a hard time understanding. And maybe, if there's something really challenging that book doesn't explain well, I might do a little mini lecture on that. But most of the time, I'm going to be giving you the chance to test out your own understanding by posing this question to you, having you think about it. You're going to use that clicker to vote. And then most importantly, we're going to have you discussing this in groups with your peers. And this is going to give you a chance to really check out, do I really understand that? How is somebody else thinking about it? And this will give you a lot more opportunity. And if things don't, if the class is struggling with it, then you'll have a chance to get feedback from me right then. Before you leave the lecture hall, you'll actually be able to get, maybe some of your questions answered. And then, of course, we actually, in this class, we have a lab, and then you'll go on and put that knowledge into practice in the lab. And then, of course, we have, exam at the end, where, again, you'll show your mastery knowledge. And what's so great about this is that it really increased your opportunity to get feedback, okay? In that we're giving you the opportunity to really work on the hard stuff here in lecture, where I can explain things, I can try to answer any questions you have, I can do another example, whatever that may be. And this whole design is really based in research on how people learn. So it turns out that people don't just, have information dumped into their brain, but in fact, all people, in fact, construct their own understanding. And so that's what we're going to give you the opportunity to do in class, is construct your own understanding. Now, to do that, it turns out that you must actively work with a problem and, try to perhaps even explain it to other people in order to best construct your own understanding of that issue. All right, so really, how is this going to work? Okay, so we'll come into class, and at first there'll be this quiz. All right, and this, we'll use clickers to do this, but that's just because it's the fastest thing to do. We won't be having discussion about these questions. It'll be very fast. And again, these questions will be about the preparation that you should have done before class, the required reading or video watching, whatever that may be. And in fact, I will provide you with some example questions before each class with the assignment, so that you'll have an idea of what that is. And again, we want everyone to get 100% on this. This is just a check for yourself to make sure you're ready to be engaged in more, the more challenging material we're going to talk about in class. Then throughout the main part of what we'd call lecture, this is what's going to happen. I'll pose a carefully designed question. It's going to be multiple choice, okay, but I'm going to use my expertise based on what I know is challenging for people in this class, what people tend to have trouble with, and I'm going to create a question that's going to put that in front of you so that you have to struggle with it. And you're going to think about it yourself, first off. Everybody will work on it themselves, and that actually forces your brain to be ready to learn more effectively. And you're going to vote with your clicker, and then we'll have some idea of how people did. But the very next thing that's going to happen is you have been assigned into a team of 3 people, and your group is then going to immediately turn to each other after the solo vote and discuss this problem. So you can talk with each other about what you thought the answer was and how you thought about it. And this will give you practice in analyzing questions and in talking about these challenging concepts. All right, and this will help you construct your understanding. So during this discussion, you guys will try to hash it out, work it around. I'll come around and so will the TAs if you have any questions. And then during this period, we'd like you to all reach consensus and agree on one particular answer. And then I'll call for the group vote. And everybody in your group should vote, so you all each have a clicker, you will all vote again, but I need you to all vote the same way in order to get your point for participation at this point. So we want your group to really discuss and come to an answer. And after that, we'll be running a class-wide discussion. Now, actually, you are going to start this discussion because you guys have just discussed this question in your group. So what we'll do is we'll ask you to raise your hand and to let us know about what you talked about in your group. Because maybe you guys had some really interesting thought, or you had you're not really sure why that answer is the right way, that answer is the right one, and we'd like you to ask that in front of the whole group so that we can all share from that understanding. And I'll fill in there as well to let you know how I think about these kinds of questions. Now, I know that participating in a very large class, or really any size class, by raising your hand and saying something is, kind of an intimidating thing to do, but it's really worthwhile. It's where a lot of the value in learning comes from this class, because I can't most effectively assist you in developing your expertise if I don't hear from you how you're thinking about it, all right? And so in order to encourage you to participate in this class-wide discussion, I will, in fact, be giving out candy. I am more than willing to bribe you to engage you in asking a question during this class-wide discussion, maybe sharing an explanation that your group had, or summarizing what your group talked about. Because again, it's your explanations in your own words as the people who are learning the material for the first time that are really critically helpful, both for your fellow students learning and for helping me to make sure that you have a deep understanding of this concept that's really important. So that's how things will be going in class.